You are listening to the Freedom Podcast with Van Moody. Our desire is that you begin to live in freedom every day. Freedom in your mind, freedom in your finances, freedom from the external pressures of life. Prepare to be transformed as we seek to be free, mind, body, and soul. Let's get started.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Freedom Podcast, where we explore a variety of topics that leads all of us to a life of freedom, purpose, and fulfillment. And in particular, each month, we get into one of what I believe is one of the most important topics as it relates to freedom, and that is financial freedom. And so each month that we get into financial freedom, I am honored to be joined by my brother, my co-host with the most, Pastor George B. Thompson, all the way from LA. And so we are super excited that you've joined us on today's episode because we are, there he is. We're going to jump into something, George, that is in many ways a follow-up to a hot topic. Oh my goodness. We got into your financial love language on a previous podcast episode, and we want to really do a part 2 to that and talk about financial intimacy. Let me first of all set the table, because when we talked about your financial love language, I began to really share how we all have a different love language financially. Many people are familiar with the love language concept in that we all have different ways that we communicate love and receive love. But when it comes to finances, guess what? We also have a different financial love language. And I laid the foundation of the really 4 types of financial love languages or financial types that we often have to experience, or we often are as we think about ourselves. I talked about the driver, and for them, money is success. I talked about the analytic, and how for the analytic, money is security. And I talked about the amiable, because for the amiable, money means love. And then I also talked about the expressive, because for them, money is about acceptance. And so we really, in a previous episode, began to break those 4 types, those financial types, financial love language types down. But what we want to do today, when we start talking about financial intimacy, is really dig into, so then how do they coexist? Maybe you're a driver and maybe you're in a relationship with an analytic, or maybe you're an analytic and you're in a relationship with an amiable, or maybe you are an amiable and you are in a relationship with an expressive. Once you understand your financial love language, the next question becomes, well, then how do we get along? How do we coexist? How do we make sure that we have healthy intimacy in the relationship and we don't tear each other apart because we look at finances and we have a mindset about finances that's totally different? I even shared in the previous podcast episode, George, the difference between my wife and I, and how earlier in our marriage, man, when we would talk budget, oh my gosh, it was heated, because I would lose it. Like, you spent $200 to get your hair done. Like, what? But I learned. Yeah, buddy. I mean, but no, sir. But we learned how, when we understand each other's love language, how to coexist so that we can have not just great intimacy, but also financial intimacy. So how do we do this, George? I mean, right. You see it in your practice. You and I are both pastors. And in many ways, this is about marriage counseling, couples counseling. Number one reason for divorce in America is money. Number one issue for couples that, are struggling often is money. And sometimes it's not the absence of it. It's just that they don't know how to get along. So how do we deal? How do we deal with this, George?
Use of it. Right. So that's a great question, but I want to also define a couple things. That was great how we look at that. So one of the things I'm asking all listeners to do is look at if you're a driver, analytic, amiable, or expressive. And then what financial intimacy is. I know everyone thinks about intimacy. The first thing you think of is usually not finances. But what financial intimacy is, let's just look at it by definition. It is the freedom, this is a freedom podcast, freedom to be able to discuss and talk about finances where someone doesn't feel hurt, or that they can also be vulnerable. And so that you can work on it together. So as you told the story about your wife, like originally when she was getting her hair done, you're like, $200 on doing that. Then you have to learn that if that's a priority, because you have to learn how to
Yep.
prioritize your finances. We're going to go a little deeper into that in a little bit. But if that's a priority to one side, then you also want to make sure that you're doing it on both sides. If you remember, there's something that's very misquoted in the Bible. It says to be equally
We
yoked.
did.
If you remember, we talked about that last time. That is a believer and a non-believer. But now I'm just going back in time. Look at the Bible when they say yoked. So yoked is like you don't want to have
Yep.
something imbalanced from that perspective. Like if there's a mule that's really high and one that's low,
Yep.
that's unequally. You want to get them that are
Yep.
on the same height and the same size so that they can do it. Or if someone's taking long strides, you guys, I clap sometimes when I get excited about what I'm going to say. If someone's taking long strides and someone's taking short strides, how do we do strides together? That's really what financial intimacy is. So the first thing we want to do is have what's called a
Yep.
kitchen table conversation. I know people don't sit around kitchen tables and everything, but one of the things is, no, you use my wife. Actually, when I was dating her, she wasn't my wife. I used to go to this restaurant with her on Wilshire, and we would go out on Friday, and I would literally do this to her. I would tell her my dreams, and she would like literally tell me like how it was going to happen, like and we just kind of just have a talk, because you want to have a discussion about the current finances, but then you want to have goals. So if it's all right with you, Bishop Van, is I want to at least go to some vacations and party and everything like that, because we want to put that's part of the discussion too. We want to be able to talk about those things. So first is, I call it kitchen table conversation, where you have a conversation about finances. Let's talk about, and then you let me know what you also would like to, what you'd like to talk about. So first thing you want to do is you want to talk about just a general budget of what's going to happen. And then we talk about accounts. So just so you know, if people are now getting married at older ages and different things, should we have a joint
Yep.
bank account? Yes, you should. You can have an individual account, but there needs to be a joint account that pays the bills of the household. And there needs to be an account that pays those bills. And there needs to be a budget for that. How much is the mortgage? And there's
And
something
soft
called hard
costs.
costs.
Yep.
And there's something called soft costs. And now we can go into that, but also we already covered all that during the financial conference. We can go into those things. And then I'm going to go into goal setting. Is there anything else that you think would be good to have during a meeting when you're having, I'm going to use the word financial intimacy, just a meeting that you should be talking about with finances?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I think you've got to make sure that you're having those kitchen table conversations. And I think, what you talked about with your wife in terms of sharing those dreams is really important. I want to go back to something when you talk about intimacy. I love to define intimacy as intimacy, right? A lot of people think that intimacy is just about sex, but it is about this transparent ability for the person that you're in a relationship with or a deep friend to see into you, right? That you are not hiding, that you're not masking anything, that they're able to really fully see who you really are. And that same definition applies when we start talking about financial intimacy, because we all have goals, we have dreams, but guess what? We also have baggage. And it's important that we are able to unpack all of those things. And so I want to add dynamics to what your kitchen table conversation needs to be about. You need to talk about hard costs, soft costs, how we going to keep the lights on, et cetera. But you also need to be able to have conversations about the dreams and goals that you have financially, but why those things are important to you. And, George, we talked in a previous podcast episode, and I want to revisit this because you touched on something that I think is extremely important. You cannot have real financial intimacy. You can't have true, meaningful, transformative, organizational kitchen table conversations if you're hiding from each other. And so when you started talking about having a joint account, I noticed some people initially, they were kind of like, what? Hold up. I hope they didn't, turn the podcast off, because what I've discovered in all of these years of pastoring is oftentimes people don't want to have joint accounts because it's a way to hide. People have sometimes an unhealthy relationship with money, or they don't want to share, or they don't want to have these conversations that foster accountability. And so it's easy to say, well, you have your thing over here and I have my thing over here. And what people don't realize, George, is when they do that, they literally violate one of the first most important principles of marriage, which is called the law of priority. When God talks about in Genesis 1, leaving and cleaving, for this cause a man must leave his wife, his mother and father, and be cleaved to his wife. So that's the law of priority. And what that means is you guys have to come together and to create your own reality. And that is the reality of values, but that's also the reality of finances, which is why coming together, not only having those kitchen table conversations, but coming together and being open and honest and transparent. Intimacy is so important, because what happens in a good relationship is your financial strength is actually multiplied. But when you hide, when you start bifurcating and say, I got this pot over here and I'm going to do what I'm going to do over here, you do your thing, a house divided, Jesus says, cannot stand. And that's the same thing financially. So when we start talking about financial intimacy, it starts with, you got to be transparent. You got to have the conversation, but it's got to be an honest, parent conversation about, where you are, where you want to be, what you're doing, and then sometimes what you're doing that you don't need to do anymore. People oftentimes talk about,
Right.
Goals, and let's have a bucket list, but sometimes you need a stop doing list. What are the things that you're going to stop doing so that you and your spouse, or you and the person that you're in a relationship with, can really be in sync for what you're trying to accomplish. George, I see a clap on you, so let me get out of the way.
Right. I know. I'm gonna start clapping. Before I clap, though, I want to say that what you said, a doing list and a stop doing list. Let me tell you why that's so important, people, and why I was going to start clapping, and why I'm clapping is this: is that if you are not equally, I'm gonna say yoked, where you're not using everyone's advantages. That you see how I said someone is lower and someone's higher. I'm not asking you. See, if you guys stay separate, the other person has to come down. If you come together, you
Oh,
can
that's
bring
good.
somebody up. And then this is the clapping part. If your strides are short, I know you clap for. But while you were saying that, the not do listen that how you get the strides longer, you know how you get the other person's strides longer? Is they see you modeling. Remember, we don't tell people stuff.
Yep.
They see you modeling certain things, and then they'll say, "Hey, I like it." Like we brought up in like you guys, I think I'm a pretty good money saver. My wife is actually better than me. She will go there and like I'll sit there and I'll say, hey, let's go there. Like, people go to gift shops and stuff like that. My wife doesn't do that. She'll sit down and talk to the people that work there and go like this. Hey, where can I go and get this stuff? Can you take me where they go get the stuff? I'm like, I'm like, I'm like, can you at least say hi to the lady? Kim say hi to the lady. Kim's over here praying for me. She goes, and then I'll come back. Kim will open up her backpack. It'll be full of stuff. And Kim like this. Here's this stuff, and then we do that. And then I'm showing one other way of blessing people. We buy Starbucks gift cards, and we give people gift cards to things, and then we give them out, and then we see what people give back. But you see how if I was holding back and she was holding back, I wouldn't get to see that side of her. And then now let's talk about generational. I'm clapping for myself. I'm gonna clap for myself and then this. Let's talk about generational wealth. How you pass generational wealth to your family. I'm saying your brothers, sisters, uncles, cousins, and your children is partially it's money, but
That's
the other
it.
part is knowledge. So they get to see you do this stuff. I keep bringing up the trip to Hawaii, but I'm on this trip and I did all these things. My kids got to watch. They ate more food than everybody else on there because I brought it with me because everybody else was just sitting around waiting until
Yep.
the next stop to go get it because you already had it. Is show people and model good behavior, and then people like it, and then it's a good experience. So you can do that when people are communicating and better. Then I said one last thing, but I gotta say this since we're talking about intimacy, and I want to make sure everybody because whenever you bring up sex, see that people get excited when you say that. But let's just talk about being stimulated. Okay, so let's talk about stimulation. You know what? I'm gonna do something I usually don't do. I'm gonna talk about how my wife stimulates me. You know what thing she does that stimulates me? Okay, guys. All right, put your hands over your kids' ear. She saves money and it stimulates me. She'll be like this. Hey, George, guess what? I got this. I talked to me. I got this for 50% off. Or I got this. I'm like, go ahead. George, I got the bill paid. I got this. So what happens is Start looking. This is intellectual stimulation. Like by talking about saving money. Do you guys know spending a whole bunch of money? That's not stimulating. So what happens is I'm now going to jump into Bishop's fan relationship with Ty. I'm sure somewhere along the line, she'll say, hey, we did go on this trip that we did all this stuff. She did get her hair done. But guess what? On our way back out, we saved on this.
Yeah.
We did that.
Well,
So
you know what, George,
together.
you just brought up a really huge point. In a previous session I've done in marriages, I talk about, you know, the most important needs for a woman versus the most important needs for a man. And I think we probably need to visit that again on this podcast episode. But I want to give one away, because when we start talking about stimulation, it's interesting. You know, we're going to keep the podcast PG, but it's interesting that people should note that there is a correlation between financial security and relational intimacy. And I'll tell you why. Because one of the number one needs of a woman is actually security. And what I found is, and there's so many studies out there, that when a woman feels secure, you know, that the family is going to be taken care of, that the roof is going to remain over her head, it heightens intimacy in other areas in the marriage and in the relationship. And so I want to say that to all of the individuals listening to this podcast. Please don't bifurcate this and think, oh man, financial intimacy is not a big deal. You know, what are these guys talking about? I'm only concerned about the other kind of intimacy, but they actually do go together. Because if the number one need of a woman is security, and she's in a home or in a relationship where that financial security is not spelled out, then that's going to spell trouble in a lot of other ways. I'll let you dream on that and imagine what some of those other trouble areas can be. But the point is, the two go together. And so if your spouse is an analytic, which means for them money is security, right? And you, for an example, are an expressive or an amiable, and you all do not come together to figure out a way to make sure that those values are aligned, it's going to spell unnecessary drama and trouble in the relationship.
No, that's true. And but you see that you're already seeing that. So now I'm talking to spouses. So first, women, is that you know that, and then also men. Just think about it. Think about it this way: is that when you go on a trip, is everybody relaxed? I mean, are you really relaxed on a trip? If you got a charge thing, like if you're wondering like, what are we gonna do for dinner? How much does it cost? What can we do? What fits in the budget? You know what I mean, like where if you're already kind of have things planned out, like in the other area, that's as Bishop Moody had said last time,
Then the repair.
Prepare.
That's it.
Then the repair is that in the morning, like when we go on trips, it's like this. Hey, this is all the stuff we have planned. So what I'm saying is these things cost. These are some free things that we're doing. These are some educational things we're doing for the kids. These are some things of this. And then we already, and I'm fine. I'm fine because I already know, I already set a number. We're already at that number or below it. And then I'm excited. So I'm like, hey, let's just do something else. Let's do this. So it's just much easier that way. Then your wife is taking a picture, guys, with her feet. You know, everybody takes a picture with their feet and the toes and the ocean right behind them and all that. That happens when you're a lot more relaxed than when you're wondering what's going to happen.
So, George, we talked about kitchen table conversations, defining what intimacy is, and, you know, starts with transparency, you know, open and honest communication.
Right.
Not hiding anything, this notion of, you know, jointly coming together, sharing resources. What are some of the other tips? Because I know in your own practice, you see a lot of couples that are struggling unnecessarily because they really haven't recognized that they have different love languages. You know, maybe you have the analytic, you know, that's married to the driver, or the driver that fell in love with the expressive. And so now they're trying to forge ahead, and they're like oil and water because they haven't factored in how do we thrive with financial intimacy in this relationship. What are some of the other tips in the last few minutes that we have that you want to give to the listeners?
So you guys, so the tips actually in working on that, I'm just going to hit these a little bit faster, and then we'll have to probably delve a little deeper into them a little bit later. But how this works is whether someone is a driver, analytic, amiable, or expressive, one of the things you want to first start doing is setting goals. So you want to have what's called short-term goals, medium-term goals. Short-term is actually within 18, like a year, what you want to do, between a year, 18 months, like all the things you want to do. Then I'm going to say 2 to 5 years. The reason why I say 2 to 5 is this, is the more aggressive you are with them, it can happen in 2. If you're going to go the slower route, it's 5, and then long-term goals. Then you want to actually set timelines to these. This is the part where you're learning to work together, because you don't want to try to do these by yourself. You want to do these together. Then you actually, now moving on to the next one you want to do, is actually start having a wealth building plan. Because even if someone is expressive, there's more concern about what's happening today and the people and everything, but they also still want that to happen later on. Like, in other words, if someone likes to give or give, not give, but if somebody likes to actually, I'm going to say give things away, but just like they want to spend money and they want to do these things, if you still want to do it in the future, you can give out more if you build wealth. It makes it easier for you to be able to do that. So you want to do that. And then, and your wealth building plan, it just has those basic elements of a budget, a plan to do good, which means get out of debt, and then also how you're going to manage your retirement and how you're going to walk through those.
You know what, George, that's really significant, because one of the things that couples need to talk about, and you're never too young to do this, but this retirement conversation is changing dramatically. And a lot of couples don't talk about it. They think, well, we'll talk about it when that time comes. No, you need to actually prepare for that now. You know, how long do you want to work? When do you want to retire? What does retirement look like? For some people, retirement looks like getting a Barca lounger and kicking their feet up. For others, retirement is a transition in life and doing other things. But whatever you want to do will require a financial plan. And I've also seen, when we talk about breakdowns of financial intimacy, I've seen couples who, because they haven't discussed that, they get to that point in life, and it's not defined by an age. I know individuals that retired from one career in their 40s because they wanted to start a business. I know individuals that sold a business in their 40s and started another business, right? So it's not about getting 70 or 65. It's about, though, having the conversations and saying, okay, this is kind of my long-term plan. And and it's not just your plan, particularly if you're in a relationship. This is really about our plan and what do we want to do at these critical stages in life, and having those conversations and really talking not only about the financial implications of these decisions, but then what kind of life do you want to live? What is absolutely necessary? George, you and I are older now, and I remember that the things that were important to me financially in my 30s, they're not important to me in my late 40s, as I approach 50. They're not nearly as important anymore. You're at a different season and stage in your life. And I think you have to have those conversations. The Bible talks about husbands dwell with your wives according to knowledge. And so when we start talking about financial intimacy, you got to have that knowledge. You got to know, where are they? What's important to them at this stage in their life? The worst thing you can do is to give someone what they used to need, or even something that you think they need that they don't need anymore. And so once again, that's really important as well, because that all is a part of financial intimacy.
Right. Or misinterpreting and not knowing what their love language is. And not, that's another one, is like not giving to. But what's I'm going to tell you something actually kind of a little bit sad right now, is that when we're meeting people right now in retirement, a lot of people that are in their 40s or certain ages, 50, 60, that haven't planned, say that I'll never retire. We used to never hear that. Like, what I mean? Like, people say, oh, I just need 10 years and I'll be able to do that. There's a lot of people now that just say, I'm just going to just keep working. And I think that is that's the absence of having a plan. And there are certain resources and things that you can do it much quicker than you could a long time ago. There's a lot more things that are available to you, and in doing that, and especially with minorities, I'm hearing that more than ever. Like in doing it. So not having a plan is doing that. On the encouraging side, though, what I'm hearing is that we used to not want to do estate planning as much, because this is also part of the kitchen table conversations. Estate planning is like wills, trust, powers of attorney, and everything like that. And then, Pastor Van, I have to come back to you on this one. I think the pandemic is the reason why is that when the pandemic hit, people are like, wait a minute, where's mother's paperwork? Where's father's paperwork? Where's my paperwork? My kids want the paperwork. Like, because when people went in the hospital, they couldn't just come back. You couldn't go in there and see them. You couldn't go in there and get nothing signed. You couldn't come in there and do that. You were doing, and it just changed the whole game in that area. So I think that not having a plan now has way more consequences than it did in the past, or just always had in the past, but that you can make some decisions right now that can change the trajectory of your entire family.
Yeah,
if you just make them.
That is huge, George. You know, we recently had our Empower Financial and Entrepreneurship Conference, and one of the free items that we gave away to every person that registered was a legacy plan document, because, you know, I lost my mom in 2019, and I hated having to go through her stuff to identify certain critical documents, right? It made the grief process more complicated. It made everything more complicated. And so one of the things, as you talked about, estate planning is an important conversation, but then also having all of that information in one critical place is extremely important. So I want to encourage our listeners, if you were not a part of our Empower Financial and Entrepreneurship Conference, you can go back, you can get access to that content on demand. You can get that information at vanmoody.org. And you can also continue to tap into a lot of the resources that George and his team are creating. George, let's tell the people where they can find you. I know that you've got a new book that's getting ready to drop, or has dropped, or is dropping, 21-day fast start. So let's talk about where people can get access to that content and how they can connect with you.
Oh, excellent. As you were saying, so in June 1st, but then we're doing this, we have the 21-day fast start. Focus, act, sacrifice, and trust God. So it shows you how to get to the next level in your finances. I've written 5 books, and this is my 21 best ideas. We do them every day, and then we're also going to be having a Bible study on this as well. So you can sign up, by the way. You can go to my website, georgebthompson.com. That has a lot of my information, And then secondly, if not, you can go to my splash page, ican'tfindgeorge.com. So that's where you get all the information. And then also about the estate planning. Also, we have something called a peace of mind checklist that kind of goes through what you would need in case something were to happen to somebody, for yourself, and go up a generation, meaning your parents, and then also your brothers and sisters, and also for your kids. So that'll also help you. But there's a lot of information in there for you. But then also a lot also is on Bishop Moody's page as well.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today on the Financial Freedom Podcast with myself and my co-host, my brother, Pastor George Thompson, all the way from LA. It's been a great episode, and we look forward to you joining us for a future podcast. Listen, if you love this podcast, do us a favor, give us a great rating, give us 5 stars. That helps more and more people be exposed to our podcast. You can share this podcast episode with someone that you think would benefit from it. I hope that you would like the podcast, follow the podcast, so that you can get notified every time a new episodes drop. We drop episodes each week and each month. And if you subscribe to the podcast, you will be plugged in and won't miss a moment of incredible content that I believe, and George believes, and all of our team believes will help you to live a life of freedom, purpose, and fulfillment. So, family, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Freedom Podcast. For a broader range of topics, go to Van Moody's YouTube page or visit twccc.org.